Again, Christmas greetings, brothers and sisters. It's wonderful to have you here to consider the light that God has sent into the world. So flash forward in your mind for a few minutes to what it's going to be like here in the church after we've passed out the flame and you've caught it onto your candles, holding them in your hand, and we turn off the light. How many of you have seen that before? Raise your hand. I'm pretty sure it's a very large number of you. So you can picture that easily, right? Picture what that looks like. Dark church, candles in hand, little light from the tree perhaps, right? Little light from these candles as well. But all the electric lights off. It's very different than what we're used to, right? We don't live by candlelight anymore. But we love to do that. There's something cool about that light. But what I want you to think about is when the church looks like that, what would it take for you to not recognize what candlelight is at that point? Sounds pretty ridiculous, huh? I mean, complete blindness, I suppose. If you had some kind of issue with candlelight, maybe some kind of rationalization, but in the end, that's just stupid. Of course you know what candlelight is. And at no time would you know candlelight better than when all the lights go off in the room. And everyone's holding a candle. And that's the only light in the room that there is. When we get to the last reading, John is going to say, Jesus is the light of the world. Now we know what light is, and we know what light does. But John will say, the light will shine in the darkness, and the darkness won't get it. Literally the Greek word in that verse, right at the beginning of the reading that we're going to have from John, it means to try to master something. Not try to, it actually means to succeed and master something. I find the best word in English is probably grasp, but master is pretty good. Imagine being faced with light in utter darkness and not grasping it, not getting it. How on earth would that work? To understand it, we have to change the scenario. You can still imagine the church in the darkness. You can still imagine the candlelight. But now you have to do something a little more challenging. And then you start to understand why this is hard to grasp. Imagine spiritual light. What on earth does that even mean? Spiritual light. You have to imagine spiritual darkness first. Close your eyes and picture what's going on in the world right now. Is that too hard? You don't have to think about the world in general. I suspect most of you don't even have to close your eyes to imagine some darkness. You may have experienced some today. You may have experienced spiritual darkness for years. And now tell me the truth. Aren't there piles of ways you could fail to see spiritual light now? Focusing on spiritual darkness? Thinking, that's how I need to live, that's what I have to deal with, that's how I have to find my way in the dark. And God says, I don't want you lost in the dark. I want to give you the light that you need. So he'd want to make it obvious, right? He'd want to make it really, really clear. But if there are all these ways to ignore it, clearness doesn't equal grasping. You know what I'm saying? If this world can wallow in darkness, then it has plenty of ways to sit in a dark room with light shining from a brilliant source and go, ooh. and again. You probably don't have to think hard to come up with an answer. Jesus is the light of the world, but a light for the soul. And as a light for the soul, it must overcome ignorance. This is why the light came as it did, recognized by so few. You've just heard the children begin reading what it looked like as the fulfillment began, and you're going to hear more about that. You just heard the reading from Luke 2, explaining that when the light came into the world, this light that God wants to be obvious, right? He wants it to be clear. It came into the world through a virgin. And you can say, well, that doesn't make sense already. Fine, that's fine. But think of it in terms of trying to recognize the light. Young girl in a society where people were sometimes stoned for adultery. Having a baby. That's how the light comes? Traveling to the city of prophecy. Wow, this starts to sound like the light coming, right? The city of prophecy, Bethlehem Ephrathah. Ooh, now we're getting somewhere. Shows up, no place to have the baby. The baby. How's that the light? How's that clear? You're about to hear about the first people in the world to know what happened. And it wasn't the folks over in the capital city of Jerusalem. You're about to hear a reading where some Gentiles came from a faraway land. They go to Jerusalem because who wouldn't go to Jerusalem to find out if the king had been born, right? That only makes sense. But he wasn't born there. And the people in Jerusalem had no idea what the Magi were talking about. Who heard about it? You guys know the story, right? Shepherds watching sheep at night. Got any third shifters? Not usually on the third shift at a time in your life when you have the influence to share the light with the entire world. Is it clear? Is it obvious? He says we need it. He says it's the light. And then he says, oh, but the darkness didn't grasp it. And we're like, well, of course we didn't. You show up in Bethlehem, unannounced, no reservations. Jerusalem has no idea what's happening, and then you're told shepherds. But you know what? This light is overcoming rationalization. It's overcoming ignorance. It's overcoming hatred. It shines in the darkness. I don't just mean it shines in the darkness because there's darkness. I mean it picks the darkest spot. So brothers and sisters, if you came in here tonight, there's a dark spot in your life. It causes you to sweat a little bit every time you come to a church. If you came to Christmas Eve today and thought to yourself, oh man, how am I going to get through this? Guess what? The light shines for us all. The light shines in the darkness. And you know what's a funny thing about light and darkness? Darkness can do nothing about light. You feeling some darkness today? Guess what? That doesn't change what God did. Adam and Eve, they were tricked, right? That was the first reading. They were tricked, and they bought into it. Oh, the shame! I mean, God comes walking in the garden, they're making excuses, they're hiding behind trees. That's stupid. I had to hide a tree from God? But that's what shame does. That's what darkness does. And it did not change what he decided to do. He still came. He loved them. He promised to connect with them in the most intimate of ways. The Word becomes flesh. If you felt shame, if you've experienced darkness, you may have thought of an experience with God as being something to be avoided. You might be thinking, it's a good time to find a tree to get behind. I think you're half right. I think it's a good time to find a tree to get in front of. I think it's a good time to find a lighted tree. A tree with a light to get in front of. Because even if you can't grasp it because of the darkness that haunts you, God shines for you. The obliteration of the darkness of guilt and shame, that's for you. That child who is going to experience the worst darkness this world has to offer is for you. And when it kills him, as it will, he'll rise for you. I can't grasp the light, but that doesn't stop it from shining. Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas.